Hi and welcome this morning. I'm coming to you from the practice today, so happy Friday wherever you are. So this morning I'm recording this because later on this morning I'm going to be doing some training, so I won't be able to do this live. So yeah, I just wanted to come to you this morning though to talk to you as part of our Let's Talk About Behaviour series that we've been chatting over the last few weeks, and exploring a little bit more about what to do in terms of when there is challenging behaviour. So we've talked a bit about a model that looks at trying to understand what is happening underneath children's behaviour, and we've looked at understanding sensory differences and profiles, understanding how nervous systems are activated when we're seeing children who have behaviour that maybe we're struggling with or we're struggling to understand. So the framework has been looking at what might be happening underneath, and today we're going to be talking kind of more specifically around what we can do when we see some of this challenging behaviour. So firstly, I suppose the terms that often get used, and I've used them in the past myself because they sit like inside this kind of behavioural model, is even the terms challenging behaviour. So that idea that when we describe someone's behaviour as challenging, it is saying that their behaviour is maybe challenging us, they're challenging parent, perhaps power or authority or teacher or something authority. So there's kind of this connotation that there's a bit of a struggle or a bit of a competition for who's in charge. Now that can certainly feel like that when you're a parent or a teacher and you've got some behaviour that is not going to plan, or you're trying to do something or get out the door, or get tea on the table, and your child starts having some behaviour that challenges us and challenges maybe the family system and challenges what's going on. But I think the term challenging, again, should be something that we look at in terms of how we describe kids' behaviour, because one of the things I think when you look at understanding children's behaviour through this lens, which is not the behavioural model, it's about looking at how they're being challenged or perhaps even overwhelmed in that moment. And so rather than saying it is challenging behaviour and they're challenging us, or they're being challenging, so it's like they're kind of trying to do this, again, this model really looks at understanding that they are being challenged, that they are being overwhelmed in this moment, and it is not a deliberate choice. It is not something they are intending to do. It is that they have been met with a demand that they don't have the capacity to respond with in a way that we maybe expect, or perhaps in a way that would suit us in that moment, and maybe in a way that they would like to be able to respond as well. So certainly thinking about how we can be thinking about, while they might be challenging us in that moment, that they are being challenged themselves in that moment as well. So thinking maybe even another term that we can describe, perhaps it's that they're overwhelmed, that they're having trouble, that they're having some difficulty regulating. Even that is a nicer way of kind of looking at things. So what I wanted to then share is just be thinking about the different kinds of behaviour that we might see when we're talking about challenging behaviour. And that is going to be maybe some things like strong emotions coming out. And when those strong emotions come out, we might see outbursts, we might see tears, we might see what we'd normally describe as tantrums. We might see all kinds of different things. And again, they're those tip of the iceberg kind of things. It's when that behaviour is really, really heightened, and they don't have either the cognitive skills, so those thinking skills to regulate like they would like to, or they haven't learnt them yet. So, one of the things, again, when we're thinking about our child being overwhelmed, that frame of mind is more likely for us to be in a stance of my kid's having a difficult time. When we think our kid's having a difficult time, it really switches on that, how can I assist them? You know, they're not doing this to me, they're having a really tough time. How can I support them in that moment? What do they need in that moment? So it asks us to be thinking about how can we be helpful for them. So one of the things we're really understanding when we are seeing our child being overwhelmed in that way is they need us. So they need us to step up and to be there. Now, we are often challenged by that behaviour. So part of that is thinking about, am I able to do that in that moment? And so it absolutely asks us to be thinking about our own regulation ability and trying to maintain a sense of calm in our own body, in our tone of voice, in our facial expression, and in the way that we respond to our child. A lot of our stress, a lot of our unsaid thoughts come through in the way our body moves, in the way our tone of voice is expressed. And so being really mindful that even if we're trying to be supportive with our words, or even if we're saying things like, hey, what do you need right now? If we don't say that in the right way, it's likely to be not containing and not calming for our child or teenager. So it does take a lot of work on ourselves in terms of really believing that our child is not doing this to us and that they are having a difficult time, and seeing around behind whatever challenging behaviour, because the challenging behaviour can be sometimes directed at us. It can be verbal words, it can be, you know, throwing things, it can be trying to lash out with their bodies, all kinds of things that are likely to activate our own fight or flight system and send us into kind of a state of arousal. So it does take a lot of understanding of our own bodies and a lot of awareness of our own bodies and our own capacities as parents, teachers, educators, whoever, you know, whatever situation that might be, to regulate ourselves and be calm and supportive to meet the needs of our child or teenager in that moment. So when we're doing that, it's thinking about, how can I support them? What is going to help them return to some state of calmness? Do they need me nearby? Do they need me close? Do they need touch? Do they need space? You know, do I need to be more quiet? Do they need less stimulation, less overwhelm, but remaining a close kind of attachment figure? Because when people are overwhelmed, when they're stressed, we're usually their safe person and their safe space for them. So it's not necessarily just giving them so much space that they feel like they're on their own and dealing with it. Because again, whilst they might not be saying they're overwhelmed, they may not be saying, I need you, mum, or I need you, dad, or I need you, teacher, close by, we know from what's happening to their nervous system that they are moved outside their coping capacity, and they're moved into either a fight or flight kind of response or like a shutdown response. So we want to help them to get back to that kind of stable, safe space for them. And that usually is a person that they have some kind of attachment or a good relationship with. And so we use that relationship to help them co-regulate. And that is just really sharing what is happening with your nervous system. If you can be calm and regulated, lending that to them in that moment. And again, how you express that, a lot of that will be nonverbal. Sometimes it's using language, but a lot of the time it might be nonverbal, and maybe just staying close or staying nearby, regulating our own breathing, seeing if you can get some mirroring happening with their breathing. Again, we want to bring that heart rate down. We want to be able to introduce some calm so they can move out of that over arousal state, and find some calmness again. So the other thing to be thinking about is how am I standing or sitting near them? Am I down on their level? Am I showing in my body posture that I am relaxed and approachable? Whatever it might be. Often what we tend to do is we try to do teaching in that moment. We try to give instruction around what we'd like to see instead. I don't want you doing that. You need to do this. Can you please do this? Can you please stop it? And so there's lots of instruction giving and lots of again adding to the overwhelm in that moment. So we're really thinking about, if that's your go-to style, really try and pare that back and try to think about their child system, what is happening in that moment, how I can mirror a safe, calm space for them, giving very minimal kind of verbal instruction, because again, the brain is not likely to be processing instruction in that moment, and seeing if that can all calm down. So this is very different to, again, some of the behavioural approaches of ignoring behaviour or disciplining that behaviour or putting them in timeout or anything like that. It is absolutely about, what does my child or teenager need in that moment in terms of their nervous system, and helping them calm back down again. It doesn't mean you can't introduce what we call, and Mona Delhook calls top-down strategies, those cognitive and thinking strategies. But again, it depends upon the age and stage and development of your child or teenager. And in that moment, remember, everyone's capacity is a lot more narrow. It's a lot limited if we're in that over arousal. Yourself, when we're stressed and we're stressed out, that ability to kind of do that, okay, keep calm, do this, do the things that I know are going to be helpful parenting kind of strategies, is much harder to do when we have been triggered ourselves, when our heart rate is up, when we're feeling all of that emotion in our bodies and in our brains. So really taking note of what happens when your child is presenting with behaviour that challenges us, or behaviour that is them overwhelmed and them moving outside their capacity to deal with in that time. So certainly I often get lots of questions about, what do I do about, and it's usually really big behaviour. So running away, yelling, swearing, hitting, all those kinds of things. And what do I do in those moments? Now, usually what happens in those moments, they're kind of those emergency kind of situations, those crisis situations. And whilst there's no perfect answer around that, one of the things, I suppose, is about doing no harm to you, to them, and everyone keeping as safe as possible. So however that needs to be, that kind of response is usually how people get through. And I suppose for some families, they go from crisis to crisis to crisis, and then, fairly enough, are going, we can't do this anymore. This has to stop. Like, how are we going to stop this kind of crisis behaviours and these escalations and these explosions of behaviour happening? So the answer is, of course, it's in all the before stuff. It's all the space in between those explosions, between those really big challenging moments between parent and child, or teacher and child, or whoever it is, that we have to look at really carefully and closely, because there'll be clues about building up to those outbursts or those moments of overwhelm. And that is where we kind of get really good at observing kids on the different pathways, and we get really good at observing what their day is like, imagining what their capacity is like in terms of the stress and the input that perhaps has been onto their system. We get good at thinking about their sleep, their food, their hydration, and stresses throughout their day, and see if we can understand triggers and patterns leading to those explosions so we can prevent them. So we get really a lot more tuned in to that space beforehand, because that's when we're going to be able to do some really good nurturing around that. And a lot of the emotion coaching parent programs that I teach and deliver, tuning into kids and tuning into teens, is really helping parents understand how they can notice those smaller emotions. And that's when things are kind of either building or it's when their stress is kind of just coming up and down. And so it gives parents sort of a bit of a scaffold to say, how do I have conversations around that? How do I help my child do that emotion regulation while it's lower? Because it's much easier to do that for you and for them if we're going in when emotions aren't in that crisis mode. Like I said, that crisis mode and those explosions are really just about getting through them safely. But there's no perfect response that is going to say, right, if you do this, then that thing's never going to happen again, because that's just the result of all the stress and all the build-up that kind of happens. So we have to be thinking about why is their nervous system tipping over into those responses, and what's the build-up like beforehand. And I've talked in other presentations and things just about the interoception difficulties that some kids have, which is that being aware of the internal signals in the body. So having a lack of awareness of when things are building up, like strong emotions or physical discomfort, and how there's some work that might need to be done in that way. And the emotion coaching model helps parents develop emotional literacy in terms of helping kids identify different emotions or different things that might be happening, and having a bit of a back and forth reflection and discussion, which helps build some maybe a verbal capacity around identifying and talking about emotions. But for kids who aren't even at that, it's really about co-regulating in that moment and being a safe place for them to experience strong feelings and helping them get through that as well. So it's all about thinking those moments beforehand, being really observant about the ups and downs in your child's day. And that can be really, really tricky if you've got kids that are away from you at school or childcare or kindergarten or high school for big chunks of the day, and then you kind of reconnect at the end of the day and they're really, really heightened, or they're really, really stressed, or you're really stressed and tired, and that as well. So it makes that extra challenging, I think, when you're not aware of what maybe has been happening during their day, or aware that they are perhaps at their capacity when they get home, and how to, I suppose, circumvent or change the way that outpouring of stress is treated at the end of the day. So it certainly asks us to be proactive and be on the front foot in terms of ways to be able to come back down again, to have that support. And it certainly sometimes means linking in with services at schools, kindergartens, childcares, those kinds of things, to make sure that that young person's nervous system is being attended to, and they are able to kind of have a person that they can feel contained with, or they can get some calming and some regulation happening. And again, sometimes the older they get, the less kind of human co-regulation that they're going to have access to. And I think that's super challenging, particularly in high schools, thinking about how important relationships are, especially for our neurodivergent community, in terms of really feeling understood. And when they have, 7 or 8 teachers, it can be extra hard to think they've got a person who they can feel contained with and safe with. So that is really, really important. And I think it can't be overestimated how important those relationships can be. So if that's something that you can take away and be thinking, like, who in my young person's life can they have that kind of relationship with when they're feeling overwhelmed or before they're feeling overwhelmed, have they got a safe person that they can kind of go to where they can feel calm again, which may prevent some of those big explosions that I know lots of young people have when they get home, and how to prevent that kind of cycle of holding and then exploding that parents feel, because that is really tough for the young person, and it's really tough for the parents and the families at home that see those big behaviours that are really disruptive and really unpleasant for everybody involved. So be thinking about relationships. Obviously, the younger they are, perhaps we have more time with, one or two or three people who really know our child, and that can be really useful. But certainly just thinking about that importance of understanding kids' nervous systems, understanding what they need, and encouraging people who are around your child to be looking underneath the behaviour, not looking at the behaviour as something that's being done to them, but something that is an indication that they are overwhelmed, that they are having demands placed on them that is outside their capacity in that time. So I hope that was helpful. Please, once I've put this into the group, if you've got any questions about that, let me know. And if you need any extra support with anything, please reach out. I've got Glimmer for parents who are new to learning about neurodivergent kids and how to get support and how to kind of move things on, starting very, very soon. So reach out if you're interested in that. Otherwise, check out any of my other coaching programs that I have going and my other free resources that are around. So wishing you a very happy Friday, and I will talk to you very, very soon.